Okay, does anybody have any Bible questions?
No, I didn't have a Bible question, but the song kind of coincides with what we did last night at home. You know, we sat on the porch, all four of us, and being that this is a month of, that we celebrate Thanksgiving, you know, we started the month off with a 21-day devotion of thankfulness, and it's kind of coincides with the song that we read last night, Psalm 100, the song that you sung. And I was thinking about the song when I came in here, and then here you are, a song for Thanksgiving. And I was like, okay, that's nice, Lord. I hear you talking. You know, you try to, you know, we ask God to speak to us, and if we don't allow the so-called coincidences to connect in our lives, then we won't hear Him speak. You know, so I thought that was pretty neat, and you know, kind of give God a cap nod. You know, like, I hear you, Lord.
Right. One of the things that Jacob said is he said, God was in this place and I did not know.
That's right.
And some people have looked at that and they've said, well, isn't God everywhere? It's just about us being open to seeing that. And so some have said that every bush is holy. Or rather, the bush was always burning. Every ground is sacred. It's just about being able to see the presence of God in those places. And that's not how we're used to thinking, but that's the way Jacob said. God was in this place and I did not know. Lonnie?
That reminds me of what Barbara was talking about when I was playing music with the Gospel Serenaders, and we was traveling in the car going to Jacksonville, and I made a statement. I said, I wish God talked to me like other people. And this old lady that was with her, she said, he probably do, you just say listen. That meant a lot to me.
Right.
It made a lot of sense.
I think I probably told you the joke already, most likely. So you probably heard it actually, where the man was in the hurricane and he prayed for God to deliver him from the hurricane, right? And the firemen come by and they say, hey, you got to get out of here quick. You know, storm's coming. It was evacuation. Everybody got to evacuate. He said, no, I prayed for God to save me. He's going to save me. And then the floods rose up through his house, and he got out on his roof, and the guy on the boat came by. He said, come on, man, come on. This is the last chance. You got to go. He says, no, I pray for God to save me. He's going to deliver me from the hurricane. Then he sent the helicopter come. And the helicopter comes and lifts down a ladder and says, come on, you got to go. This is it. After this, nobody's going to come. He says, it's all right. God's going to save me. Well, he dies in the flood. And he goes and he's talking to Peter, and he says, Peter, I thought God was going to save me in that hurricane. He says, well, he sent you some firemen, he sent you a guy on a boat, and he sent you a guy in a helicopter, and you never took any of those opportunities. And that's kind of how we are. Is you know, calling them signs is kind of heavy, because we think of signs, we think of all kinds of like stuff in Revelation, but oftentimes there's signs in our life that we're going down the right path, we're going down the wrong path, and a lot of times we like to ignore those things. Here's a quote. I've been listening to this preacher a lot recently because Laura and I watched a documentary on him and it intrigued me. And he said, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Right.
And so what he was saying is, a lot of times in your life, you'll be ready to learn something, and you'll start to find all these people that are willing to teach it to you.
Right.
And so that's kind of like what.
Is that the Chinese proverb?
It could be. Most likely is.
I haven't heard it before.
I think it's a pretty popular saying.
Yeah.
But it sounds kind of like Yoda almost. You know, it seems like something what Yoda.
I heard that in some of these old pictures with the fighters and stuff from China and different things.
Oh yeah, most likely, yeah.
Those called masters and things.
That's right. I think that's what the exact quote is. When the student is ready, a master appears. So that might be.
Everybody said it in different countries. They said it in different ways.
That's true.
Every culture has said it. They just said it, in different
That.
Because I heard it as the student determines what the teacher teaches.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. That's what people do. They put it in their own words.
The one thing that they teach you is you only, and I'm real bad about this because I want to get right to the good stuff, and I don't give good stepping stones sometimes to get to the good stuff. They say you want to be half a step ahead, because if you get a full step ahead, you're already, you're not going to be able to connect with anybody. And so one thing I've had to learn to do is slow down a little bit and not talk so crazy, right? Because I get to talking crazy and nobody knows what's going on unless I slow down and explain myself. There was another quote I had in mind. Let's see. Let's go back. Let's see. When the master is ready, the teacher appears. You mentioned a Chinese proverb. Oh, I can't remember the other one. Oh well, it'll come back maybe if it's important enough. It will. So, a couple of good thoughts there. All right. I was going to give you an option, but I'll go ahead and ask this again. Does anybody have any other Bible questions or comments? All right. I'm going to give you a choice tonight. I've got that PowerPoint that we've been working on. Been working through it kind of slowly, Sunday by Sunday, whenever we get a chance. But I also have Habakkuk 3. So do you want to do that PowerPoint some more, or would you rather do Habakkuk chapter 3? You would like to do Habakkuk? Okay, we can do Habakkuk. Nobody else say anything, so we'll take your silence as consent and go to Habakkuk. Here is the psalm, by the way, Psalm 95. Come, let us sing with joy to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to him with psalms. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods, in whose hands are the depths of the earth. The peaks of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for it was he who made it, and his hands formed the dry land. See, just about, right? I told you it was a psalm, right? And Keith said, well, this wasn't in the book. Well, it was in the right book. So we just had the wrong books we were looking. All right, Habakkuk chapter 2. We got a couple more verses to get out of this, and then we will go to Habakkuk chapter 3. Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 18. Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 18. He says this: What profit is the idol when its maker has carved it, or an image, a teacher of falsehood? For its maker thrusts in his own handiwork when he fashions speechless idols. What are your thoughts on verse 18? Oh, what are your thoughts on verse 18 here?
What profit is
Yeah.
the idol when its maker makes it?
Yeah, what do you think this verse is talking about?
That's from another part of the Bible where it said about the idol, man fall down to it to worship the heaven when he the one made it, or something like that. I forgot when.
It's a lot of that in Isaiah.
Yeah.
To where God is telling the children of Israel, and telling the Egyptians about, y'all worshiping things that you made with your own hands.
Yeah.
That's right. The passage that I think that y'all are thinking of is from the book of Isaiah. There's one in 42. There's also another in 44. Let's see. If you recall, here we go. Verse 13 of Isaiah 44. He says, Another shapes wood. He extends a measuring line. He outlines it with red chalk. He works it with planes and outlines it with a compass, and makes it like the form of a man, like the beauty of man, so that it may sit in a house. Surely he cuts cedars for himself, and takes a cypress or an oak and raises it for himself along the trees of the forest. He plants a fir, and the rain makes it grow, and then it becomes something for a man to burn. So he takes one of them and warms himself. He also takes a fire to bake bread. He also makes a god and worships it. He even makes a graven image and falls down before of it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over this half he eats meat as he roasts a roast and is satisfied. He also warms himself and says, "Aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire." But the rest of it he makes into a god, his graven image. He falls down before it and worships. He also prays to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." So you have this man, and the image of it is he's grown this tree, made it real big, watered it and all that. He cuts it down, takes part of it, burns it, cooks over it, uses it for warmth, and the other half he makes it into an image. And he says, "Oh, this is my God." So this is kind of what Habakkuk is saying in Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 18. They're creating these idols, and they're the makers of it, and these idols don't speak, and they're bowing down before them, worshiping these idols. And so Habakkuk says, "Woe to him who says to a piece of wood, 'Awake,' to a mute stone, 'Arise.' And that is your teacher? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all inside it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all of the earth be silent before him." So this is a contrast between God and idols. God, in fact, said, you're not to bow down before any graven image, right? And even at the base of Sinai, when they made that golden calf, remember? Moses had condemned them for doing that. Over and over we find this in Scripture, where God condemns these idols and these symbols of worship, like the stones and the cut wood and all that sort of thing, and statues. He says the Lord is in his holy temple. He reminds them the presence of God was seen in the temple when it was made as a tabernacle to begin with, then later as a temple, and then again when it was rebuilt. God was manifested in there as a cloud. They even heard him speak from that cloud when they received the law on Mount Sinai and the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land. And so this was not a God who is speechless, but a God who spoke and who continued to speak through the apostles, and who speaks even to us today through his word. Anybody have any extra comments or ideas on verses 18 through 20 of Habakkuk chapter 2? Lonnie? Oh, okay. I thought you. Oh, okay. I saw a movement. I'm like a T-Rex. When I see movement, I like an apex predator.
It's just basically saying it's worthless idols. What are you doing?
Yep, that's right. That's right. So you made the thing, and you're going to worship it. I can imagine some of those newspaper comics that pick on young people having a picture of a kid with a cell phone and have Habakkuk 2, 18 through 20. But not just kids. Just about everybody's hooked on their cell phones.
And and also with that, those idols, the Bible says God is a jealous God.
Right.
And he ain't gonna share his glory with nobody or nothing. They are gods, but they're not big G God.
Right.
And you see it in other passages of the Bible where eyes they have, but they see not. Ears they have, but they hear not. Mouths they have, but they speak not. And, God, basically we know that this is for the children of Israel to understand that you're following after these people, and their own gods can't deliver them. When I send these kings in
right.
to do them harm, they're going to pray to God. So I'm letting y'all know I'm the living God. But I'm not going to change because of you insisting on following these idols that they worship in image, these images that they worship. We see in several kings of the Bible that some of them tore down.
Yeah, like Josiah.
Yep, Josiah.
Right.
Uzziah. You see a lot of them that went in and tore down the groves, as they call them.
Right.
And some of them, they continue to allow the children of Israel to worship. So, but my thought on that is just that God ain't gonna share his glory. He's a jealous God.
Right.
He don't want nobody or nothing to be honored before him.
That's one of the problems in Scripture is whenever man tries to make himself God, like with the Tower of Babel, they are trying to place themselves above him, and there's many times when he doesn't stand for that. Here's a passage that we can consider as well. Leviticus 26 and verse 1. This is where we were actually going to go. We're going to finish this chapter up next Sunday morning, hopefully, and we'll actually finish 26 and 27 all at one time, because 27 is really straightforward once you realize what's going on. We'll talk about that, though, next Sunday morning. He says, "You shall not make for yourselves idols, nor shall you set up for yourselves an image or a sacred pillar, nor shall you place a figured stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God." Now, this expression, "I am the Lord your God," where does this come from? Where was this statement originally uttered? Exodus, that's right. Before that, when Moses goes and stands before God in the burning bush, right? So this expression, this name of God, Yahweh, right? This is the God that we read about this is the name of God that we read about in Exodus 3. Now, so this is the God who says, no, just because you Egyptians have the power doesn't mean that I'm on your side. I'm actually with the people who are being oppressed, and I'm going to lead them out of your hand. Over and over again, what we find is that it's God that delivers those who are oppressed. He's not on the side of the oppressors, but he's on the side of the oppressed. Those who are humble, those who are powerless, those who are meek and lowly, right? Humble yourselves and I'll lift you up. Just look at the Beatitudes. The same picture of God is seen there. These other gods, however, when people pray to these other gods, what are they praying for? What are they trying to achieve? Power and status and stature. They're trying to oppress other nations and take advantage of them. What was the gospel of the Egyptians' gods, right? The gospel of the Egyptians' gods, the more people you can oppress and do the work for you, the more luxury you can have for yourself, right? And so the battle, the 10 plagues in a sense, and we talked about this before, was sort of a battle between the true God and the false gods of Egypt. A lot of the plagues that were done to directly attack one of the theories of God that the Egyptians had, right? So the reason why, besides the whole, there's only one God thing, the reason why they're not supposed to build any sort of idols is because of what these idols endorsed. What if you built an idol to Molech? What does that say about you? Yeah, you may just cause your children to pass through the fire if you get jealous enough. So these other gods were connected with very dangerous ideas and very damaging sort of beliefs that cause you to hurt other people and really damage other people. And so he says, don't put any of those things up. You just worship me, for I'm the Lord your God. There's a distinction between the God that we serve and some of the false gods that people create, even for themselves. Okay, Ashley.
That passage reminded me of Romans 9, where it talks about how does the clay say to the potter, question the potter about what he chooses to do.
Right.
That's what it immediately took me to with that passage.
Anybody else? All right, Habakkuk 3. Let's go ahead and finish. Well, I'm not going to finish this, but we'll get as far as we can. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet, according to Shigionoth. Now, basically, it's just saying that this is a type of psalm. This is going to be very symbolic. This is going to be very over the top, and there's different theories about what this passage is talking about. People think that this is simply talking about God generally delivering his people, no specific event or ideas in mind. Other people have meticulously gone through this chapter and pointed out specific events in Israel's history that these various verses apply to. Either way, the message is the same, is that God is a powerful God who delivers his people. And so as we read through this passage, that should be what's at the forefront of our mind. He says, Lord, I have heard the report about you, and I fear. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. So what the ancient Hebrews saw the judgment of God as was not what we call retributive justice, but what we call restorative justice. It wasn't God punishing them just for the sake of punishing them, because he was mad and he needed to fulfill some sort of desire to punish, but it was with the goal of restoring them.
Right.
So with the judgment comes mercy. So some have pictured God as having two arms. The one arm spanks and the other arm embraces, right? And you have to be willing to be willing to accept both arms in your life. You have to accept the discipline and the embrace, because the point of the discipline is to lead to the embrace, you see? We see that in a family, in a household, the head of the household. We see that with God. The Father punishes not just because he's mad or upset, but he wants his children to repent. He wants his children to be corrected, to behave, right? And so what the prophet Habakkuk says is basically, okay, we've got enough judgment going on now. Let's get some mercy, please. We've been through it. I think we get the message. At least that's what he's saying. So, O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. This is that work of deliverance that God had been known for, delivering them over and over again.
Right.
In wrath, remember mercy. Okay, now that's there's a lot there we could even look at the cross in a sense. Jesus dies, but he's resurrected.
Right.
You have death, but then resurrection. All right, verse 3. God comes from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. Now, these have to do with different regions surrounding Palestine. And so, again, many people have looked at these. Oh, I thought you were nodding at me, Ashley. You were just talking to chair. So, many people look at these as references to particular historical events, and that's why they do that.
Right.
Then he says, his splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His radiance is like the sunlight. He has rays flashing from his hand, and there is the hiding of his power. So you have, again, this idea that the beauty of creation is symbolic of the power and majesty of God. There's a song that's in that long list that I had, and it's called Every Time I Kneel to Pray. And one of the things that it talks about in that song is every time I see a child, I see the gentleness of my Lord. Every time I watch a storm, I see the awesome power of my Lord. And they go through several different symbolism, points of symbolism there. And that's kind of what Habakkuk is doing here as well. He's saying, when I see the earth, I can't help but think of your might, of your power, of your brightness, of your righteousness, of your glory. He says, before him comes pestilence, and plague comes after him. So there's the judgment aspect. He stood and surveyed the earth. He looked and startled the nations. Yet the perpetual mountains were shattered. The ancient hills collapsed. His ways are everlasting. So you have these various nations of the earth, these various nations that can be described as mountains and hills, falling and collapsing, but God continues on and stays forever. He says, I saw the tents of Cushan under distress. The tent curtains of the land of Midian were trembling. Did the Lord rage against the rivers? Or was your anger against the rivers? Or was your wrath against the sea? That you rode on your horses, on your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made bare. The rods of chastisement were sworn. So again, it's just the idea of judgment and destruction. Here's one thing about this, as he's about to point out. Did the Lord God rage against the rivers? Your anger against the rivers, your anger against the sea? If you look at the next passage, he says, you cleaved the earth with rivers. So you have this idea of what does a river do? It erodes and tears away. And if you look at a time lapse of a river from above, have you ever seen one of those videos? And it shows the river doing like this. And then in a few years, it shows the river kind of looping more that way, or cutting out more deeply, or making even itself wider. And so you have this river and these oceans, and the ocean, beats against the side of the coast. And what a lot of people have said is, because of erosion and things like that, and the ocean just beating against the land, and Florida being such a low level, we might go back underwater, right? Depending on if enough of that erosion takes place, right? And just the natural rising and falling of the ocean and whatnot. So here's the picture that we're having. He's using creation and natural events in creation to bring about pictures of God's judgment, mercy, and wrath. He says, the mountains saw you and quaked. The downpour of waters swept by. The deep uttered forth its voice. It lifted high its hands. We see this highly symbolic personification of the universe as all giving praise to God. Sun and moon stood in their places. They went away at the light of your arrows, at the radiance of your gleaming spear. So a lot of the extreme language that we read, like in other prophets, Isaiah 13, for example, the sun turns to darkness, the stars fall from heaven, the moon. All these events are using cosmological, extravagant language to picture that even the universe has reverence for God, that he's in control of everything. And they often are symbolic of princes and kings and queens and different royal families. But that's used, and they're using those particular signs to talk about just the power and the might of God, as we see right here. In indignation you marched through the earth. In anger you trampled the nations. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You struck the head of the house of the evil, to lay him open from thigh to neck. So again, what is he doing all this for? He's doing all this to bring about salvation for his people. He is, again, delivering them from those who have oppressed them. And this is what Habakkuk is saying. You've punished us. You've sent us into captivity. Let's get mercy once more. Come back and punish those who have afflicted us. Punish those who have taken advantage of us. Anybody have any comments on verses 1 to 13 of Habakkuk chapter 3?
What I'm saying is the illustration and the words that he's using, they're undeniable.
Right.
So in our day and age, there's so many things that you can illustrate to give us an idea of who a person is or a situation or an event. In their day, they didn't have too much to identify with.
Right.
But those things they could identify with, it was undeniable.
That's right. He couldn't pull up a PowerPoint presentation with stock photos and videos from YouTube, right? So what do? Well, look at the sun, look at the moon, look at the stars, look at the water cycle, right?
And those are, so for the children of Israel, it's a reminder. Look what our Lord and Savior did. Look what Yahweh did. Look what John did.
Right.
This is a testimony. This is something that this is etched in history. He's trying to share with the children at that time, with Israel at that time, like, this is undeniable.
Right.
Then for the other nations, like, look what he did to y'all.
Right.
Look what he did to them.
And he can do it again, right? That's good. Anybody else? All right, verse 14. Oh, Lonnie?
Do you remember the song they made, 100 Pounds of Clay? When I was, I said that's where they got the idea to come up with that song. When I was a child, I used to hear it all the time.
Huh.
I think it was Jim and Dean song.
I guess I'm not
100 Pounds of Clay.
I guess I'm not familiar with it.
But he rolled his big sleeve up and a brand new word again.
I guess I don't guess so.
Yeah.
Maybe I've had it. Maybe I've heard it.
That song's probably 45 or 50 years old.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
Totally. And can't you see him walking around, and then the heels coming up and all that. I don't forgot how the song goes, but yeah.
Right.
I think that was the name of 100 Pounds.
I'll have to go listen to it, I guess, because I don't.
That's an old song,
He took 100 pounds of clay, and then he said,
Hey, the sun, I'm gonna make this world today.
Oh, well.
Totally rolled his sleeve up and all that.
pretty good song in his day.
Yeah, I'll have to go listen to it.
Yeah, that was a popular song.
100 pounds of clay. All right.
That was the name, huh?
We'll keep that in mind.
We're the only
We'll
people
we'll learn that one next Sunday night.
No, it was a top 40 back in the day.
But that when you think about that, and then I was thinking about the statement that I think it was Patrick Henry that said, "I know one way of judging my future, that's not my past," and that's what they had to go on. Things that they knew that God had done and had kept telling them what He's gonna do, and then He did do it. And those were reminders saying that A lot of those people that when they came over, they knew the Bible and they used different statements they had read from the Bible and it set up the Constitution and all that.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Very true. A lot of our legal documents from back in the 17 and 1800s were filled with.
Thomas Jefferson and all that. I
Right.
wish I can see that play. Cost so much money though.
Which one?
Hamilton.
Oh, Hamilton. Okay.
It's in Naples.
Oh, it's in Naples.
Cheapest seat $500 something.
Whoa, really? Whoa. Wow, that's a little bit too rich for my blood, but
Too much money for me?
that's right.
I'm not that rich.
All right.
I'm not rich at all.
Verse 16. I heard, and my inward parts trembled. At the sound, my lips quivered. Decay enters my bones, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. So this prophecy that he's given. He's reflecting on the whole prophecy. This prophecy that he's given about God's judgment, about God's mercy, even about God's might, it's caused him to really just be afraid, because he knows what's going to happen to those people who refuse to listen to his message. He says, though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exult in the Lord, and I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. So he says, even though this judgment is coming, I'm going to stay faithful. Everybody else might not, but I'm going to keep on keeping on, because he's recognizing it as divine judgment from God. He says, yet I will exult, or rather, verse 19, the Lord is my strength. He has made my feet like hinds' feet, and makes me walk on my high places. Then he says at the bottom, for the choir director on my stringed instrument. So it's just a psalm that was written to be sung in the place, to remind them, even though judgment is coming, they're supposed to stay strong and stay faithful, right?
Best way to remember something is in the song.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's
They
what.
had taken a lot of things out of school, and that was one thing. Singing the nursery rhyme.
Oh yeah.
Brought it back.
Well, that's one way.
People learn quicker.